Good evening and welcome, League of Women Voters members, guests, panelists, moderator. Thank you all for attending. In person, the valiant few, and online, the many Zoomers. This evening, our first general meeting of the 2022-23 year, we've invited an expert panel to cover an essential issue in the run-up to this November election. Are your voting rights in danger? But before we hear from our panelists and moderator, we have some preliminary matters. First is our land acknowledgement. As is our tradition, the League of Women Voters of Salt Lake would like to begin tonight's meeting by acknowledging that we are gathered on Indigenous land. The Salt Lake Valley has always been a gathering place for Indigenous peoples, and we acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute people, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute nations, and is a crossroad for Indigenous peoples. We pay respect to the elders past and present. We also consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that are our history and legacy, and seek to uncover the truth. For 100 years, the League of Women Voters has been a nonpartisan, activist, grassroots organization that believes voters should play a critical role in democracy. We encourage informed and active participation in government, work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. Simply put, our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. Now a disclaimer. A recording of tonight's event will be made available to the public on the League of Women Voters of Salt Lake website, lwvsl.org, and on our social media. Other recordings of this event, whether they be in person or of a computer screen, may not be used without the express written approval of the League. The League will only allow audio-video of this event to be broadcast in its entirety, except by the media reporting on the event. And now to some important League announcements. In addition to this night's event, the League of Women Voters of Salt Lake has several important events. Tomorrow night, September 22nd, we are co-sponsoring a candidate forum with the West Side Coalition. Candidates from congressional through county races will be on hand to meet residents, address questions, and share their views on issues of importance to West Side Salt Lake City voters. The event is from 5:30 to 8:30 in the grand building of the Utah State Fair Park. See our website, lwvsl.org, for more information. For League members, join us Saturday, October 8th for our annual Fall Fete. This year we will be honoring Catherine Weller, former president of the League of Women Voters of Utah, for her generous contributions to the Salt Lake and the Utah Leagues. Check your email for an invitation or RSVP and purchase tickets directly on the League's website. Before I introduce our moderator, who will introduce our panelists, I want to speak briefly to our Zoom audience. There will be a period for questions and answers. You may type your questions in the question and answer thing at the bottom of Zoom. There isn't chat enabled for you to talk to each other, unfortunately. And finally, I want to thank Janine Kuhn-Coker for arranging this panel. Now, we'll move to the main event, introducing our panelists and our moderator. Our moderator tonight is Katy Owens Hubler, seated in the center of the table. As you'll see as soon as I change the camera angle. Katy Owens Hubler is a consultant specializing in election administration policy and technology. She previously served as a senior policy specialist in elections at the National Conference of State Legislatures, and has also worked for the Denver Elections Division and the Carter Center's Democracy Program. Ms. Owens Hubler has a BA in International Affairs from Lewis and Clark College and an MA in Political Science from the University of Colorado in Denver. We are indebted to her being here.
Thanks so much, Linda. I'm actually going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves and their role in Utah elections. But I'll just introduce briefly. To my left here is Nikki Venugopal from the ACLU, Sherrie Swenson, the Salt Lake County Clerk, Shelly Jackson, the Deputy Director of Elections in Utah, and Delegate Nathaniel Brown from the Navajo Nation Council. So thank you everyone for being here. And I'm going to start with Nikki and just tell us a little bit about your role in Utah elections and something that you might be worried about, but something also that you're excited about looking forward to in the November election.
Sure thing. Thanks, Katie, and I'm very glad to be here today. So, Nikki Venugopal, I am the Director of Campaigns at the ACLU of Utah. And so my role as it relates to elections, or I should say the ACLU's role as it relates to elections, is that we are a nonprofit, a nonpartisan nonprofit that focuses on our civil rights and liberties. And so in this area, of course, our voting rights. So our major role is ensuring that everybody has access to their voting rights and fair access. And not only that they have their guaranteed constitutional rights under the law to vote, but that they have real and meaningful and practical access as well to actually voting. So we serve a bit of a watchdog function, but mostly we try to work collaboratively to make sure the voters have what they need and have the access they need to vote.
Thanks, Nikki. Sherrie.
I am honored to have been in the county clerk for nearly 32 years for Salt Lake County. I oversee the elections, marriage, passport, thank you, and council clerks. And of course, huge part of my job is administering the elections for Salt Lake County, and that involves keeping the voter registration database, keeping it updated. We use the National Change of Address from the U.S. Post Office to continually update the registered voters in Salt Lake County. We also get information from vital records so we can determine who needs to be removed from the list. We even use obituaries to try to make sure that we remove voters who are no longer with us. It is an ongoing process to keep our lists updated. I am so glad that we have a vote by mail system in Salt Lake and also in the state of Utah. It has been a wonderful system. It serves the voter so well. We mail a ballot to every active registered voter 21 days before election day, and they have time to review the ballot, the candidates, the issues, be more informed, and it's so convenient. So with that, we also train poll workers. We have in-person voting, and we have early voting and election day vote centers for this upcoming election. We'll have 42 election day vote centers, and people, if they prefer to vote in person, they may do so. But it's a huge task, and because of all the wonderful staff members that I have and the work of the poll workers who have made it possible for all of these elections to take place and be run so efficiently, I'm eternally grateful. But that is pretty much what we do. What I'm concerned about always is to make sure that the elections run smoothly, that we count every eligible vote, and we work very hard to make that happen for every election.
Thank you. My name is Shelly Jackson. I am the Deputy Director of Elections for the state of Utah, and I'm so honored to be here with the League of Women Voters and speaking to you all today. So my role, I actually worked in 2 different counties north of here at the county level, managing every aspect of the election. So I've done everything that Sherrie just discussed, from training poll workers to delivering the equipment. And when I was hired, it was the first time that anyone can remember someone from the counties coming up to the Lieutenant Governor's office. It usually happened the other way. And now we have myself and my director who have been worked at different counties in that process.
So in my role as at the Lieutenant Governor's office, one of the things that I do primarily is I develop training plans for the counties and go visit the counties and sort of check in on them and visit them often to see how they're going and what resources they need. One of the things that I'm scared of and also like at the same time, I think there's always a double-edged sword. I love that people are now paying attention to elections. I love that people are wanting to come and see our logic and accuracy tests. When I worked at the counties, we would beg people, Sherrie can attest to this, to come. We would beg city recorders to come. We would beg our friends and family to come. And I never had anyone come. Of course, the double-edged side of that sword is that now people are coming and being critical is fine, but being critical with sort of misguided notions. And I worry that some of the improvements that people want to make will take away some of that access. And my office and our Lieutenant Governor is just very adamant that we can have both security and access. And so that's something that we want to protect.
Yate, Shaya Tobahan Shlo, look up Bashashin, Kiani Dashache Hadot Azatana Dashanala. My name is Nathaniel Brown. I am one of the 24 Navajo Nation elected council delegate. I represent San Juan County, Utah, as well as the whole Navajo Nation in the 3 states. I also sit on the Navajo Utah Commission. So my body specifically watches what the state of Utah leadership is working on. And we do have a lobbyist. We work really closely with our lobbyists and our consultants watching the state of Utah. Unfortunately, Utah is one of the most challenging states to work with, being an elected representative for the Navajo Nation. I'm not sure, some days, I don't know if they pass the torch back and forth between Arizona and Utah, but it tends to go back and forth. But the one state that works really well with Native American tribes is the state of New Mexico. So for state leadership that's watching from the Utah leadership, we do a lot of good work together, but specifically looking at voting. We have Mr. Representative Lyman, who tried to introduce legislations, and he's not the only one to dismantle our right to vote. And also, other legislatures have done this successfully in South Dakota, where we had Senator Heidi Heitkamp, who did not win because the legislatures at the very last minute introduced a legislation on mailing, etc., and that left a lot of Native American voters out. And other states are following suit since former President Donald Trump was in office. So we do see opposition, and speaking for the Navajo Nation, working really closely with our Human Rights Commission as well as with Navajo Nation Department of Justice. We file lawsuits against Utah consistently, and we win consistently as well. So we follow the Constitution. Isn't that ironic? We're using the Constitution to win these laws against state legislatures who you would think would be following in the redistricting, these gerrymandering, et cetera, that happens. There is suppression that happens. Who knows in here who was the last state to allow Native Americans to vote? Utah. That was in 1962. Utah was the very last state, and that was only because of our heroes, our Navajo code talkers. Our Navajo code talkers, help win when Japan attacked South Korea. And because of our language, to this day, the code is still unbreakable. Last month, we did have Navajo Nation or Navajo Code Talkers Day. So unfortunately, we only have about 3 of the Navajo code talkers left with us. They are up there in age. Nevertheless, their fight for the United States and also per capita who serves in the United States military the most. Per capita, it's Native Americans. The sheer pride that they fight, not just for the nation and our people, is for every single citizen. And that has shown itself over and over and over again. But how does the United States repay us? And not very well, yes. And these are facts, even in the independence, the Declaration of Independence. How does that recognize and identify Native Americans? Our government, in black and white says that we are crazy, merciless savages. Others, recently, 152 years ago, my people, of course, were not citizens until 1924. Before that, we were taken on with the act of the United States Congress, and other churches were involved, as well as other tribes, removing our people from our homelands on the long walk, which is 300 plus miles. So these are not in the history books. These are not in public school systems, and they're not in the state of Utah public school system. So if we're going to change something right away, and I hope from tonight we walk away knowing that, I think the truth and fact should not be about people's and organizations' comfort level. I think it should be about facts. I think we need to remove religion mentality from this, this classism mentality, but to think about at the soul level who we are as five-finger people together, without color, without religion. My final point would be, I was asked this here at the University of Utah Law School a few years ago, how I feel about getting everyone on board and moving towards world peace. And I said, I think when you have a number of people, institutionalized organizations, big followings such as religious organizations, when you say and allow people, it's great to give testimonies. However, if you are telling a group of people that their own way of being and existence is the only way, that is the only right way, and what does that mean for Indigenous people who would never change or be baptized or to move into that religion? Are we considered less than? As long as that exists, we will not move towards any type of pure resting and peace in this world. So I think we need to really come at the soul level, and move forward together as humanity. And I think that's what this pandemic was here to teach us, is to come together as all five-finger people. Thank you.
Thanks, I appreciate it. And now I'm going to take it down to the really nitty gritty, because that was very philosophical and that was wonderful. So I want to talk about actually just the mechanics of elections in Utah, and from the different sort of levels of government that are represented here, and from the different groups that this affects. So Shelly, could you talk a little bit just what our system is in Utah, how it works, and particularly you already mentioned that sort of balance between access and security. And I think that's really important in this day and age when we hear so much about so much misinformation, frankly, about the integrity of elections. And how do you balance that?
Yes, thank you. So Utah's been largely vote by mail for the last several federal election cycles. One of the things we did was move to it slowly. We let first counties experiment with it and kind of develop a process. And I think that was a large key to part of its success. So and the way it started in Utah was within counties, you would have precincts that might be quite a ways away from the county office, and those would go by mail first. And so those ran all by mail precincts for a long time, and then counties started doing it. In Utah, when we say all by mail, it's a little different than, say, Washington or Oregon. All by mail in Utah means that we mail every active registered voter a ballot. And that's important because we're not just universally mailing out ballots to every person in every household. We're also culling the list. So people, if we're getting returned mail back, so we're not just sending a ballot to Sherry and she doesn't live there anymore. And so it's just sitting in a vacant mailbox. So we're sending it to all active registered voters. And then we're required to have polling places that anyone in the county can come to, regardless of their vote by mail, whether they got one or not. So it used to be you have to bring that in and kind of surrender that before you could vote in the polling place, and technology has enabled us. So that's how we're kind of different from the rest of the nation. And how it works is that we have developed over this period of time, we've had time to put it into practice. And so we have lots of elements of security. Each ballot envelope has a unique barcode, which that way, if I get a ballot or if one's mailed to my house and for whatever reason, it's spoiled, my child drops it in a puddle, whatever, I can call and request another one. I can't vote to both of them because that barcode is tied to each ballot and the one is spoiled before the second one is sent out. Our system that we have is a statewide voter registration database. So only one of those ballots, whether I mail in my ballot or I come in person, only one vote can be accepted into the system and counted. And we also signature verify 100% of the ballots here in Utah. And that was something that a lot of states struggled with, not through any fault of their own, but when the pandemic hit and they were all of a sudden saying, now jurisdictions would call me in 2020 and they'd say, I'm used to having 400 by mail ballots and I have 40,000. How do I process those? Of course, they don't have signatures on file. Of course, they don't have a good voter list. You don't need to be culling your voter list all the time if someone is going to walk into your polling place and show ID. So we were just luckily, ahead of the curve on that. So we've just baked in a lot of these security elements over time. And so we weren't having to just overnight do a vote by mail system.
Hey, thanks, Sherry. Can you add a little bit to that from the county perspective? And again, the balance of that security and access.
Yes. So when the no excuse absentee law was allowed, and the law allowed me as a county clerk that I may offer permanent absentee program. I started offering that program and I promoted that program, and I was going to senior centers, senior expos. We had advertisements, billboards, and people were applying and signing up for the permanent absentee program, but they had to apply to be sent an absentee ballot at that time. By 2012, we had about a fourth of our active registered voters on permanent absentee. So for the presidential election in 2012, we had 130,000 people in Salt Lake County of over 420,000 signed up for permanent absentee. So we already had the practice of conducting a vote by mail program. And of that 130,000 who were on permanent absentee, 103,000 actually voted by mail. So when Representative Steve Elison ran the bill to conduct elections, if we chose to at that point in time by mail, I was definitely on board with him and in favor of conducting our elections by mail. We started offering by mail elections. We started out slow. I presented it. We contract to conduct city elections. And the first cities that came on board were West Jordan and West Valley City. No, I'm sorry. It was Cottonwood Heights and West Jordan. I take that back. And their turnout for a primary was 2.5 to 3 times what the other cities were of a comparable election. And then in 2015, all but 2 cities came on board. And again, the turnout was so much greater for those municipal elections. And so after 2016, we conducted elections by mail, and it has just blossomed after that. And in 2020, we had a 90.11% turnout of a record number of registered voters in Salt Lake County, 100,000 more active registered voters than we did in 2016. And 89% of those individuals voted by mail. So 498,000 people in 2020 in Salt Lake County voted by mail, 52,000 voted in person, but it was phenomenal. And we were in the midst of a pandemic. And so we encouraged people to vote by mail, and they did. And it was an amazing turnout, a record turnout of a record number of registered voters, most of them voting by mail. And to speak to what Shelly said, for every ballot that's actually ordered for a voter, we have the unique 9-digit ballot ID number correlated to a voter in the voter registration database. And it is absolutely impossible, even when you hear people say, well, people could print ballots in their living room, foreign countries could print ballots, insert them into our system. They would never make it through our system. Every single ballot that is printed, sent to a voter, is correlated to a record of an active registered voter with that unique 9-digit number. And it's a unique ID number. And when that return envelope comes back, it is scanned through our ballot processing machine. And that voter is given credit for having returned that ballot. And so it is a very secure system. And again, every signature on that return ballot affidavit is matched to the signature for that voter's record. If it doesn't match, we send them a cure letter and give them the opportunity to have their ballot counted. They can sign an affidavit on that cure letter and submit that affidavit, verify that that is their signature on the return affidavit, and we will count their ballot. So it is a secure system. We have total confidence in it. And it's disheartening to me to hear all of this rhetoric about the vote by mail system not being safe and secure. And I really believe that it's an attempt to suppress voter turnout. I think it's very sad that we hear that nonsense.
Thanks, Sherry. Yeah, that's saying that people vote with their feet. They're voting to go by mail. They like by mail. There are some parts of the population, though, that it doesn't always work for. And I wonder, Delegate Brown, if you could talk a little bit from the Navajo Nation perspective, for members of the Navajo Nation, how this system works for them, some barriers that they might face.
Well, thank you. The biggest barrier is, I know for Navajo Mountain, Utah, and other communities, they're really remote. And I know if Lyman's bill were to go through, then they would have been disenfranchised in other areas. So on Navajo, just from Navajo Mountain, and if they were to drive all the way around, that's a good 4-hour drive one way to vote. And it's the distance of some of these locations, and right now our people, our baby boomer generation, are still very high up there as far as voting, are individuals who vote on the nation. So a lot of them only speak Navajo language. And some of them is making sure that we do have Navajo language interpreters present and really explain what each candidate, who they are, what they represent, their platform, to make sure that to get across, and that they are informed and they're making this informed decision on who they're voting for. Right now, we continue to fight for our right to vote in San Juan County with the commissioners. Even with the redistricting, we were here in Salt Lake at the Capitol building. We passed legislations through our Human Rights Commission and Department of Justice recommendation. Of course, that was not adhered to. And historically in San Juan County, gerrymandering is continues, and this is where, and we'll continue to make sure that we show up as what we did in the state of Arizona. It's really about what aligns with the population. The unemployment rate is really high, but that actually has an impact on even how we vote, and a majority Navajo people being Democrats. And in Utah, um, someone recently told me it's not really about showing up and showing the numbers on Navajo and San Juan County, it's showing consistently. And sometimes our people feel like, you know what, I'm not going to vote because the state really does not listen to me in the first place. What It doesn't matter. And if you have people feeling like that, and this is where we as leadership consistently tell them why it's important, why, and in the greater scheme of things. So that's something that, working with rural Utah, and I know ACLU and others, the Native American voting organizations have been educating and hitting. They're the grassroots in these very remote areas. And if any of you have been on Navajo Nation, very beautiful, but very dry. And, we get a lot of wind. When you're in the mix of that, people usually just want to be indoors. But even then, we have a lot of individuals also from the state who come out to help in um, disseminating information, why it is important, but also talking about the different candidates at a nonpartisan level. So thank you for that. That's really, we want to continue that work, is really educating everyone. So they are voting and sometimes, it seems like it doesn't matter whether, with parties within the Navajo Nation, they will vote for a candidate who they believe in. It's about jobs. It's about the security and the safety of where we live. So I think I'm very proud to say I recently met with some elders, and they told me um, something that was really different than what I'm used to as a younger person being in my position. That it seemed like some of them, their who they voted for it seemed to be more in line with conservative. But that's how diverse Navajo Nation and our Navajo people are at this point. So that's something that I appreciate. So again, education is really key, and especially for monolithic speakers who only speak Navajo language, and to make sure that we do explain um, the different candidates and their platform. So I can go on, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was great. And Nikki, just a little bit more about other marginalized groups in Utah and how the system does or does not work for them.
Yeah, totally. So at the ACLU, we're in this interesting space where we are both actively trying to defend vote by mail. And we know that vote by mail, especially in Utah, has sort of become the gold standard for elections in the rest of the country. And like Shelly and Sherrie were saying, other states were turning to us in the pandemic and turning to our elected officials to figure it out on the fly while we had this system in place. And we know it's secure. And we know that it provides really crucial access for people, especially in this era of COVID. But we also know at the ACLU that I think, kind of like Shelly was saying, I liked how you phrased it in terms of people are sort of, it's great that people are interested in elections, but sometimes they're missing where the real issues are. And, like Sherrie was saying, we know that claims of voter fraud are really just rooted in trying to stoke fear, and that our elections are in fact secure. But maybe the areas that we could look at for improvement, I think like Delegate Brown was talking about, are in areas like language access, in access for voters with disabilities. So to kind of dive into those examples a little bit more, like Delegate Brown was saying, so the ACLU, oh gosh, I'm going to butcher what year it was, but it feels like a long time ago, I think in 2014, filed a lawsuit against San Juan County because, like Delegate Brown was saying, the county tried to go to, and this is where the nuance is interesting, tried to go to all vote by mail and get rid of all in-person polling places that were on Navajo lands, which for reasons of language access, of needing in-person translation and in-person services to really practically serve Navajo voters, was really an attempt at disenfranchisement. And we know that attempts to disenfranchise voters always fall along lines of historical marginalization, race, economic status, etc. And so fast forward, and the ACLU, along with our partners at the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission, have a settlement agreement with San Juan County that requires them to really comply with the law and to provide meaningful language access to Navajo-speaking voters. And it's something we've had to kind of continuously keep an eye on and look out for and expanding that access. So for us, it's all about having sort of that menu of options available to voters. Many of us can vote by mail, and that's amazing. And we really need to take any threats to vote by mail seriously in terms of that's where a true threat to our democracy might lie at the moment. And also recognizing that in rural places, for voters who need in-person translation, voters with disability with a disability who need to sign their mail ballot, where their signature might not look the same year after year. Sherrie and Shelly were talking about the signature verification process for our ballots. If you can't sign your ballot sort of consistently every year, and I know that our electeds and other groups are working to sort of make the necessary tweaks to make this process a little easier, that sometimes vote by mail is just not feasible because every year you have to go through the process of your ballot being rejected, and then you have to cure it and go back and say, no, that actually was me. I know my signature didn't look exactly the same. So there are a lot of places where we work to create more voter access, and it is along lines of communities of color, people with disabilities, folks who've been more historically disenfranchised in our community. So it's such an interesting space for us to sit in because we're both saying it's both true that our elections are incredibly secure and vote by mail works so well, and election administration is often done so well in Utah. And also the real things we need to pay attention to are both protecting that system and then creating larger access for folks who the current system doesn't necessarily work for.
Good, thanks. I'm actually going to stick with you for a second, Nikki, if that's okay. So talk about a little bit about what might be on the horizon then in terms of any legislation that we should be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, I will, that's turned on. Okay. I will both say that we will be keeping an eye out for both sort of bad legislation that we will be sort of calling on ACLU supporters and voting rights supporters to defeat, and always some positive tweaks that we'd like to see. So I guess what also Delegate Brown is talking about or alluding to with Representative Lyman's bill last session. So this bill, I believe House Bill 313, No, that was the other one. Never mind. I should never try to remember bill numbers because there's a million of them and I always mess them up. But so this bill was a bill that essentially would have sort of gutted our vote by mail system, and really caused, I guess, a disenfranchisement crisis in our state if it had passed. So we advocated pretty strongly against it and it didn't pass, but we are always, I think that sort of, I kind of tipped their hand, and we're always on the lookout for that. And so we will stand ready and prepared to mobilize our supporters to go speak to their representatives if we were to see any sort of that kind of rhetoric arise in the legislative session or that bill come back. So that's kind of the bigger threat that we're always at the ACLU prepared for. And then some of the things that I just mentioned in terms of greater access for voters with disabilities. I will here shout out our partners at the Disability Law Center. They are always, working collaboratively with all of our elected officials and representatives to figure out how to make vote by mail or voting remotely work practically for our voters with disabilities. So kind of some tweaks to that signature matching process. And just sort of those little tweaks that will actually provide that more expanded access.
Great. And Shelly, kind of a similar question of what do you see on the horizon in terms of legislation, or what would we want to see?
Perfect. Thank you. So we are working on an RFP, which is a request for purchase, to implement a statewide system that would give more accessibility to our voting, to our disabled community. We did realize that vote by mail disenfranchised and didn't give equal access to everyone. So we are working on that, and I'm spearheading that committee, and I've been working with the Disability Law Center on that. It's just finding that system that is secure, that we have a little friction with the clerks. We're so used to doing the signature verification, and we realize that that is not the best verification for that community. So it's just sort of working through some of those details. So I think you'll see a statewide system coming out probably in 2025. I don't want to get too excited about that. We do have the RFP coming out by the end of this year. So that's something we're working on. We did have we had 33, I think, election bills pass last session. The only one that our office actively challenged and opposed was Representative Lyman's. And so out of that legislation, our office was tasked with developing chain of custody rules and regulations, ballot printing standards. So those are two of the ones that I have been working on with the Legislative Rules Committee, and you'll see those coming out for public comment in the next couple of weeks. We codified lots of things like voter roll maintenance, things that Sherry spoke of that we were already doing, but now they're in statute and they're required to do. Sherry was a big champion of the victim confidentiality protection bill. So we'll see an added level for people who have like domestic violence. I'm blanking on that. Law enforcement that are involved in those things. So we've had that will be rolling out next year. We actually formalized in code that it is a misdemeanor for anyone voting more than once in an election. So while that was always something you couldn't do, and you certainly couldn't do it in Utah because we were checking, it's now a misdemeanor if you try to vote in another state and we find out about it. We codified not connecting voting machines to the internet. That was already something that none of the counties were doing, but that is now in statute. And just basic transparency in ballot processing. So lots of rules about giving more access to poll watchers, lots of rules about the counties posting the times that they'll be processing ballots so that the public can come in. And that's the one thing in elections that we've always had, and we're trying, it's always been a transparent process. Every county clerk is begging people to come in and take tours. Many are hosting election integrity nights where they have an open house for the public on a monthly basis. It's just that we were always begging people to come, and now people are coming, which is exciting. So those are a few of the things that we have that are in law now.
And I would say, if you haven't gone to see it, I'm an election geek. I love this stuff. And so I've been to like half of the counties, maybe more than half of the counties, but it's really exciting to watch how this whole thing actually works and to see the whole process, every safeguard that exists at each step of the process. So if you haven't gone to do that, I really encourage it. Sorry, Sherry, everybody's going to show up at your office now. So the question to you about any legislation.
Well, and we love to conduct tours, and we have done so many tours. I can't even count them all. And everyone walks away feeling very confident, and they're impressed after they come through our process and see it in person. They can't even imagine what that's like until they do that. And so we welcome tours. And sometimes it's very few people, and sometimes it's large groups, and sometimes they're from all over the world. Utah Citizens for Diplomacy. We've had so many international visitors, and it's been a wonderful thing. So if you haven't had a tour, I welcome you to come through. And it's the best, of course, when we're processing ballots, so you can actually see what's happening as it's being done. For things that I would like to see, one of the things that I'm really concerned about, we see so many ballots that are postmarked too late, and we've seen a huge uptick. And I actually have a chart that I put together, and for the primary election in June, 3 times the number of ballots that were postmarked too late than the primary in 2020. And I don't know how to explain this, but so the deadline to postmark your ballot is the day before Election Day. In the June primary, because the legislature in the midst of the pandemic allowed for them to be postmarked on Election Day, the bill ran the next time to see if that would be continued, but they didn't allow that to go through, unfortunately. And we've seen a huge uptick in the number since the primary in actually August of 2021. And I think that's really sad. And we don't know if it's because the US Post Office doesn't have the help they need. So if someone puts their ballot in a collection box, if it doesn't make it to the processing center to get postmarked timely, I'm really worried about this. For example, in the June 2022 primary, 2,208 ballots were postmarked too late, not the day before election day. And you compare that to the primary in June of 2020, where there were only 727. And I've got this chart, and it has risen significantly over since the August 2021 primary. And the only thing I can attribute that to is maybe they're not getting them postmarked when they're picked up from the collection boxes. And we've heard reports back from citizens who've said they dropped their ballot at 8 a.m. on the day before election day, and we end up sending them a letter saying that it's postmarked too late. So I would like to see that changed. If there's anything I'd love to see in legislation to allow for the ballots to be postmarked on election day. People can drop their ballots in a deposit box, a drop box, until 8 p.m. on election day, but they have, if they're mailing it, they have to have it postmarked by the day before election day, which makes no sense to me. But anyway, that's one of the things I'm hoping for. And as far as the ADA community, I mean, I really hope that we can get a system and help to get some funding. We've looked at systems. They were during the pandemic and going into the pandemic, we looked at one, and it was going to cost about $40,000 annually. And we didn't know what the budget was going to be like in Salt Lake County to accommodate that with the pandemic. We took voting machines to some ADA voters' homes and had them vote so they could vote privately and independently on their porch. We made appointments for individuals so that they could come in. We would meet them at the door and escort them into a room in our county government center so they didn't have to be in a line with other voters. So I hope that that does go through. We definitely want to accommodate them, and that doesn't work with a vote by mail ballot. And for signatures, I do want to mention that we have more than one signature on file. We have, we'll have a first pass, and we'll look at the signature on the return envelope. And if it doesn't match on first pass, we'll look at other signatures that we have in the database. So sometimes people have different signatures on file, and we try to match other things in our database. We can have up to 5 documents in the database. So.
We'll take some towards the end, if you don't mind, just keeping it in mind. Yeah, thanks. Delegate Brown, anything from a legislative perspective that you'd like to see?
It would be, yes, back to Representative Lyman's bill. And even before that, going back to the redistricting. So in San Juan County, we are, out of the 3 San Juan County commissioners, at least Navajo, we will still retain the 2 seats. So we're happy with that because majority in that area are Navajo Nation population. So dismantling that and moving forward, you know, with the League of Women Voters, as well as others, and to keep an eye out for that, to make sure that that is not taken away. Or what we're afraid of sometimes that we've seen historically is when something like this happens, there's always trying to find a way during the legislative session. Some elected Utah representatives, senators would try to write on the coattails of the Senate, these legislations at the very last minute. So that's true everywhere, right? On Navajo, that's sometimes we do that also. We've learned within the Navajo Nation Council. But I really do like, and thank you. I would like to take a tour, and I'll invite you to Navajo. There's always room for improvement, right? So I really like the 9-digit unique code. But we will also forward you the list of some of our historical issues, the findings from our Department of Justice that continue to follow Utah voting. The biggest thing is the importance of Navajo language interpreters, translators. That's still very high on our list to make sure that our elders are getting that information. We request that over, and of course we would provide. We do have a lot of language speakers, so those are some of the obstacles, and that's something that we've asked for through legislations and from the Navajo Nation Council as a legislature. We do and we have passed legislations to support this, and somehow they go on deaf ears. So a lot of legislations that we suggest, because we know what's best. We know how our people live on these really rough roads. We know the distance is such a big problem. We know that this is some of the requests from our Navajo people, especially our elders, who are not very mobile. So again, I want to adopt that system. I'm like, wouldn't that be great to take a ballot box to the porch of our elders and give them that opportunity? Imagine the profound effect on that family it would be. There's a healing piece to that. So I'm interested in sitting down and talking about that. Thank you.
Just a follow up on that as well. And I want to talk a little bit about how the pandemic affected voting. So can you talk about that from particularly Navajo elders, for example, and were they able to vote, and what barriers did they face because of that? And is there any sort of lasting either improvements or, negative things that came out of that?
Yes, during the pandemic, especially when there was no vaccinations, and as of today, we've lost over 1,800 people directly to the COVID pandemic. And that's because of the lack of water, the lack of, and families, we still have families that live remote, and some might not have trucks to transport their water. And usually water one way would be around like 25 miles to 30 miles, 50 miles round trip. So you could just imagine on a very washboard dirt road, that will take some time. So I know our elders during the election were really afraid to go out. They were very passionate. I would say, unfortunately, we did lose some people, some of our elders and others whose health have been compromised. I would say they literally gave their life to vote. And that's how serious it is. If you have a family that don't have the luxury to wash their hands, the passion for our elders who go out and choose to vote and expose themselves to danger is amazing. It really amazes me that they hold voting so sacred. Because we did not have the right to vote at the state level and federal level until recently. So in their lifetime, they could remember when they were given that right. So that's the information that we want to transfer. So during the pandemic, I would say because as a sitting delegate, that was some of the phone calls I was getting. I even had people my age who would encourage their parents not to go outside or even touch the mail because we were losing our people to the pandemic. And it was, for myself, it was really scary because there's a lot of unknowns. There was a lot of, there's no vaccination at the time. And when you see in the 3 communities that elected me, 1 week, our dragline operators had to be we had 4 deaths in each community 4 in Denhoto, 4 in Kayenta, 4 in Chilchimbito. And when you have that amount of numbers, people leaving, imagine the morality and how scared people were. But still, I remember taking phone calls where individuals of my age would tell people, please don't tell, we don't want to expose my mom, my grandparents. But grandparents would then turn around and call me and say, I want to vote. It's my vehicle, it's my money. I want to go out there. So that's the type of commitment that our elders have to voting. And, within the state of Utah, let's continue to make that. So I will take this back to council with that recommendation to even go to our elders' house and I mean, that live really remotely. Some people are way out there. It's by choice also that they want to be with nature. So during COVID, we did not give our people that opportunity as well. So I think that those are the gist of during COVID, during the scary times. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank goodness we're hopefully past that. This feels nice, I've got to say. Shelly, what did some other areas of the state do? And do you see any of that sort of lasting
Like
in
COVID.
response to COVID? Yeah.
I think the system that we have was pretty much the system we used in COVID. I know we had a lot of unique things that we were allowed to do or told to do by the legislature, including drive up voting that some counties experimented with that I think a lot of people liked that we're not doing anymore. The postmark was one issue that the legislature during the 2020 primary election, we were allowed to do. I can't remember, maybe all through 2020. So the postmark in 2020 was election day and now it's back. That did not get carried forward. So, I mean, yeah, we saw a lot more people. Yeah, I mean, I think just the things that were in place are still kind of in place. I don't think it was a huge change for our state.
Well, and Sherrie, to you too. And one of the things I'm thinking actually is like the super centers that existed at some point. So you're using like the county fairgrounds, for example, or I think you used Vivint Arena in Salt Lake, and speak a little bit about that adaptation. And again, whether you think that's going to stick.
So we had to socially distance everyone in the midst of the pandemic in 2020, and we had 59 vote centers throughout the county, and we had A, B, and C vote centers, some of them very large. Vivint was one of them, and they offered, Larry H. Miller offered to allow us to use some of their facilities. And we were so worried about it being overwhelmed because we thought that the voters would think they were going to get to go down on the floor of the arena and meet the jazz players. As it turned out, it really wasn't very busy. And it worked out fine. There weren't that many people there. They didn't overwhelm it. They've reached out again this time and wanted to know if we wanted to use it. We really don't need that large facility, and it really wasn't well attended, but it's very kind of them to offer. We will, as I said, have 42 vote centers, and they're different sizes depending on where they're located. We still have the ABC size vote centers, some of them large, some of them not as large. And I must say that I would never want to conduct an election by mail entirely without the options to vote in person on election day and with early voting. And I think that needs to be continued. We want to have people have that choice, and we want them to have that alternative. And we have same day registration, which is in person, and that's important at early voting and also on election day. So if someone doesn't get registered to vote, they can go in person, show ID, proof of residency, and register. And that's why those in-person locations are so critical, as well as the people who didn't get a ballot for whatever reason. We didn't get a ballot to them. They moved and they didn't update their address. So moving forward, and I won't be here, unfortunately, but I hope that that stays in place, that it's a vote by mail system primarily, but also with the early voting and the election day vote centers. And we've made sure that they're spread widely through the county. They're very accessible. Our drop boxes, the same thing. And the law was passed where there needs to be a drop box in every city. And that's a good thing. So they can't do like some of these other states have done and have one drop box. So that was a good piece of legislation that was passed. And, you know, it's all about making sure that it's accessible for people and the convenience, and it isn't planned so that some people have more access than others, and the fairness of it. The pandemic was very challenging, but we got through it and it worked really well, and we didn't have long lines anywhere. And as I said, most people voted by mail. We didn't hear of any huge outbreaks from people standing in line. We socially distanced them. They had their own little stylus so they could sign the poll pad when they checked in. They took it with them. We handed them a serving glove like you see in a cafeteria, so they could use that to touch the touch screen. They walked out with it. We were very creative about it, but it all worked out and we got through it. But it was terrifying on the day that the governor put out the COVID emergency alert and said there should be no more than 10 people in an area. We had 39 people working in our ballot center, which is in the basement of this building, and no windows. It's very confined, and that didn't include the poll watchers, of which we had at least a dozen. So it was pretty scary, but we all got through it and lived through it.
And I think we just raised over Arizona in Delegate Brown's estimation. We've got same day registration. We've got something over Arizona. Nikki, anything else do you see lasting from the pandemic? Anything else you want to mention, how that affected different groups?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think kind of like was said, we saw how critical our vote by mail system was in during COVID and in 2020 particularly. But then also, I think one of the trends that we've seen that that Sherrie's speaking to is, you know, some counties aren't, but some counties have been sort of closing down more and more in-person polling places, just because because of 2020. But like Sherrie's saying, I think, you know, like our ideal system that really provides access to both. And I know counties have to make hard decisions about how much election administration costs and all that, sort of the requirements put on them by the legislature. But we are really hoping and advocating for counties to maintain that robust system of both vote by mail and in-person voting, for reasons like having same-day registration that's so crucial for not letting votes slip through the cracks. I will say, and I don't know whether this was the pandemic necessarily or just the confluence of everything in 2020, but some of the trends that we continue to be concerned about from the last couple of years. I mean, these are not necessarily new things, but we saw or at least heard rumors of people making sort of threats to either poll workers or to people voting, or people sort of standing outside, you know, driving cars with loud banners and loud music and flags that were sort of meant to intimidate voters, or sort of walking that line as much as they could between, you know, sort of electioneering in a polling place and using that to kind of harass voters, as well as poll workers and our working elected officials. So that's something that we continue to be concerned about, because obviously we can't have voters feeling intimidated, and we need voters to feel safe going to polling places. But we also know that the answer isn't necessarily to just post law enforcement everywhere, because we also know that many communities, particularly communities of color, because of historical oppression continuing today, are not comfortable around law enforcement. So we have to figure out how to make voters feel comfortable accessing their rights. And I think Delegate Brown was speaking to also a really powerful point in terms of people feeling safe and that they're not having to risk their lives by going to vote. So that's something that we are continuing to keep an eye on. And then also, we just saw, and we might talk about this later, I think, so I won't talk too long on it now, but the sort of huge explosion in disinformation, particularly online, particularly during the pandemic, when online spaces was how we were all connecting and getting our communication, and just more than ever in this digital world. Disinformation and misinformation, which is unfortunately the widespread of purposefully wrong information, or information purposefully trying to stoke fears about election security, about voter fraud that isn't happening, et cetera. is really rampant on social media, particularly. And that's something that we continue to try to fight today.
Hey, thanks. And good. Thank you for the segue too. It's just been an extraordinary last couple of years. I think back probably 8 years ago, we were worried about replacing voting machines, for example. And then there was this huge cybersecurity focus after the 2016 election. And then the last 2 years, I guess it's been the last 3 years, really, we've had to deal with all of that and misinformation, disinformation, threats to election officials. It's been a very difficult space to work in. So everybody who does this, I really praise you. Everywhere, all across the country, it's been a tough couple of years. So I guess I want to have a little bit of space for that, Sherrie, if you could kind of address a little bit of that, but also the misinformation and how do we combat that? What do we do about that?
You know, honestly, it is heartbreaking to see some of the misinformation, the disinformation, when we have so many people working so hard to do everything right and make sure that every ballot is counted, every vote is counted. And the ideas behind it and the misinformation that is being spread. And sadly, some of the voters actually believe it. Some of them know better when they're spreading this, and they're doing it intentionally, which is worse. Some of the voters believe it. And I have answered hundreds and hundreds of emails, explained our process to people, and others that just disseminate this misinformation intentionally with just trying to destroy our system, our democracy, and it is just devastating. You know, and I want to tell you, for example, our county auditor came in and did a tour, and he watched and walked through our process, and he said, it is so ridiculous that people would think, with all of the people that are working on these processes, that it would take such a conspiracy to change anything. And he caught on so quickly, and that it's just ridiculous. But yet this just keeps getting spewed out, and it is just so sad. I mean, you've got all the poll workers who put in, I call it a long day for little pay, and they're so dedicated, and there's been thousands of them over the years, and all of the temporaries we hire, all of the staff that work so hard and long hours. And then we hear these lies and these threats, and it just breaks my heart, because they're doing such a terrible disservice to our democracy. And oftentimes it's for their own personal reasons, their own personal gain. And I just hope that the people that know the right and will do the good things can help counteract that, because otherwise I think our democracy, if it keeps being pushed out in the numbers that it is, could be destroyed. I've had personal threats. On primary election day, I received a threat from someone, and they tried to go to a polling place, and they said they wanted to vote a paper ballot, and we had the voting machines for in-person voting. And the poll worker tried to explain, we don't have paper ballots here, we have a voting machine, and the person had a paper vote by mail ballot, and she wouldn't vote the vote by mail ballot. And so then she called my voter services person, and he tried to explain to her, we don't have paper ballots at the vote centers, you have the voting machine. And she said, no, it's fraud. And then he put her through to me, and she said, you have committed fraud, and we will get you. And I said, you know, what can I do? I can have you come in, we'll demonstrate our system. And she said, no, we're going to get you. And that's the kind of thing that you put up with, you know, after all the years of hard work and service, and not only myself, but all of the people that have worked so hard for so many years, and it is just devastating. So I don't know how we change that mentality, but it is truly heartbreaking for all of us that work so hard in the elections to do the right thing. So I hope all of the League of Women Voters and everybody out there that believes in our system can help us counteract it.
Yeah. Sorry, I can add to that as well. And that is truly just heartbreaking to hear. And so one of the things that we did in 2020 was we ran a social media monitoring program, which I know, because the league is just so incredible, came out to help support that. And many people came and volunteered for us, which we really appreciate. But exactly kind of what Sherrie is saying, we need folks who are dedicated to protecting our voting rights to help us sort of, there's actually some research on how to fight disinformation and misinformation. And some of it is around, it's kind of like with vaccines, it's like called inoculation. So if we inoculate our communities with actual facts, with accurate information, then they're going to be more discerning when they see that message on social media, or their friend forwards them, a tweet or an Instagram post or something that's trying to spread false information. They're much more likely to take a second, think critically about, is this information accurate? Does it sound like something that's sensationalizing this issue? Does it sound like something that's trying to stoke fear? And they're more likely to go through that thought process in their head, and then hopefully go to, their Salt Lake County Clerk's website or vote.utah.gov or one of those websites and actually look up the accurate information. So it's actually something that each one of us can do in terms of our own neighborhoods, networks, communities, groups and organizations that we belong to. If we can be sort of the purveyors of accurate information, that goes a long ways. And then similarly, it was interesting with our social media monitoring program, a whole section of it was sort of dedicated to when you see false information, what do you do about it? And a lot of it is around not spreading it farther, because a lot of us accidentally on social media will like thumbs down something or angry face it on a Facebook message or, on social media, or, send something along to our friends and they're like, oh my gosh, can you believe this? But that actually ends up helping that spread further. And particularly on social media, the algorithms eat that up and are like, this is popular, and it spreads it out even farther. So we all have a role that we can play in helping to let the bad messages kind of die with us and stop them in their tracks. And then also, have those conversations with your neighbor about, hey, I'm going to vote, this week, or I'm filling out my mail-in ballot. How's it going? Do you have a plan to vote? Or, if you hear people asking questions or having concerns, if you can help be the person that spreads accurate information, that actually goes a really long way. So.
Good, thanks. Shelly, anything to add?
Yes, our office definitely appreciates groups like the League and the ACLU. It is the scariest thing out there right now in my mind. And I feel like our office now spends so much time combating that we're not making, the reforms and the improvements that we would like to do. We have a whole project list, and it's just so hard to get to those. Never, ever did I think I would be giving a training to election officials on personal safety, on removing your name from the internet, on, how to hide your house on Google Maps and things like that. Never did I think that. In 2020, I worked at the county, and I was scared to death. We were prepared for mass casualty events. I did not send my child to school that day because I just thought, if something happens, I want him to be somewhere safe where he'll be loved and, not called out of his classroom to be told bad news. It's terrible. We've seen whole counties, offices in Texas just quit. And the one thing that our office is trying now to do, of course, we want to provide access to the voters and we care about the voters, but we're trying to support our county clerks and to say that, we've got your back. We know not a lot of people, it feels like it. The thing is, we have to keep reminding ourselves it's a small minority, but they're very vocal and they're very scary. So, and our office has taken the position that we need to just fill that void. We don't want, we kind of describe it as a rational person. If I hear these things, I might have some doubt. I want to be able to say, I'm going to go to the county clerk's website or to the lieutenant governor's. And if there's not information there, then I think that the rational person might start to think, well, there's smoke, but I don't see anyone doing anything about it. And so you will actually see our office. I just heard our first radio spot on the radio today on my lunch hour. So you will hear the lieutenant governor getting out there, and we've have county clerks appearing in the commercials, as well as poll workers trying to say, you know what, we go to school with you, we go to the grocery store with you, you know us, come to our office. And so we just hope that will humanize the clerks and the great jobs that they're doing. And from lieutenant governor, in states from the secretary of state all the way down to the poll worker, to be receiving harassment and threats is just a sad state of our democracy. But we're hoping that some of these things and humanizing the people that are doing the hard work will help.
Yeah, go ahead, Sherrie.
I just want to say that the lieutenant governor's office has been tremendous. They have supported us, and I have seen the lieutenant governor in those meetings and with the people that attack. And she has been so brave, and I'm so in awe of how supportive she has been of the election officials, the county clerks. And I want you to know that she's been tremendous, and her staff has been. So I'm grateful for that. The governor as well. So I just want to let you know how wonderful that is, that we have election officials on a state level that help us and support us.
And just on a national level, I think this is an issue that we're losing professionals. These are professionals. Sherrie's been doing this for 30 years. Shelly's been doing it in several different counties, and at the state level, they really know their job. And if they get threatened, or if this is becoming something that they can no longer do, we're losing these people who know how to make democracy run. And that's happening all over the country. And that's probably the thing that I'm most worried about, is losing all the people that I know in elections all over the country that are not doing it anymore, because it's scary to do it, and it's difficult. It was always difficult, but even more so now. Delegate Brown. Go ahead, Shelly.
People know we work more than 2 days a year now. That was always the joke before.
It's a year-round job, and it's extremely complicated.
It's really sad that, so some people who vote, who are working with voting, the poll workers, the clerk. So that's a shame. And that's something that, with the Navajo Nation, speaking on behalf of the Navajo Nation Council, that is something that we always tell our people. We do get similar intimidation, not as bad as this. So no one from Navaho, don't do that. But it's something that we would everyone's safety is our number one priority. And we want to make sure that, in this pandemic, we call it our invisible monster. And it seems like with this, however way we can support at that level. And I think the healing piece and voting in this is coming together as tribes and all people coming together. I'm going to make myself available to you to talk to the state of Utah, why it is important, and why coming together with the League of Women Voters and everyone, why it is important, and to encourage people to come out safely. I know for me, when we go on social media as elected leadership, our people do listen. Not everybody, but when we speak our language to our youth and to everyone, they listen. There's this tremendous, profound respect. And when you come from, for myself, my family always told me, come from the soul, come from the heart. And in this election time, people are reacting from scarcity. They're coming from, and certainly for Navajo people, we still have a lot of healing to do. And then if you inflict pain, and when they feel like their votes do not count, then that's when they will react. But so far to this point, I'm thinking really hard. Nothing at that level that I'm aware of during election time. We would like to keep it like that. Usually, I invite you to come out to Navajo. Usually what we do, it's almost like a big party for us. At all the polling places, the 110 chapters, we have food booths. Our people like to come out and sit there and just talk. And it's like a big family. And this past primary, it was really emotional for a lot of our people. I had elders who would hug each other for a very long time. Some of them hugged me, and I think I had a lot of tears on my cheeks when at the end of the day, they came out, and I love that. I love that, the respect for voting, even though right now, actually, I don't mean to be disrespectful. I'm watching the Navajo Nation presidential debate right now, but we have a lot of people that are consistently watching, and that's a great thing. So I hope that um well, actually, I will make myself available to the Utah election and speak to everyone. And we can do it in such a way, at least again, going back and speaking our language and having these organizations. Voting is, we hold it very sacred. And we know that a lot of our people do listen. Not everyone is perfect, and they're struggling, and we recognize that. So I I, I would say, really just thinking about healing together. There's a piece of this where coming together as, white people and Native Americans, Latinos. That is very obvious that that's out there, and that's something I think in Utah. Well, not that I think, it's something that I know when I'm with my minority groups, and Utah particularly. And like this morning, I was just in the Utah tribal leaders meeting, and we had a really good conversation. It is at the grassroots level, and the employees with the state, the government, and in the state of Utah, phenomenal. Um, just one thing, and kind of going sidetrack here, is out of all the three states during the pandemic, and this is around before, during, and after election, was the amount of volunteerism that came out from the state of Utah was probably by far the most that we receive in the Navajo Nation. So thank you for helping and expanding your aid to our people around all that time, and that includes rural Utah and all the efforts to keep that education. So thank you, to the Utah employees who have been reaching out and showing up when Navajo Nation really needed, when we were afraid. So thank you, in an election time as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Something I think everybody can do here too is we should all have a party on election day. We really should get together, talk about this stuff. Something that I feel like has been missing is just talking about voting, talking about the candidates, talking about why you support one over another. And I think we've lost a little bit of that in the pandemic. And I'd like to see more of that. So that's something everybody can go home and do. Go home and talk to friends and family. Make sure they know how to vote, and make sure why, they know the candidates and they know why they're voting for those candidates. So we can take some questions if that's okay. Do we have a microphone to go around, or should I just repeat them? Okay, could we come up to the microphone to ask questions? Thank you.
This is my big voice. I wonder if Delegate Brown could talk more about the issue of lack of physical addresses for problems with having people vote.
Thank you for that question. So in numerous other states, including Arizona, there have been legislations introduced, and luckily they haven't been successful in our Southwest states. Legislatures are only want people with physical addresses to have the ability to vote. So they were excluding individuals with PO boxes. So as we all know, a lot of us only have PO boxes. So we're changing that. And within Utah, I'm very proud to say again, the staff, the workers have made it possible. We do have physical addresses because we knew this was coming, and we know that they're not going to stop. So it was because of physical addresses.
Well, I had about different questions, so let's see. These won't be in any particular order, but I've been curious, how has it trended? What is the rough percentage of people voting by mail versus in person?
So as I mentioned in the November general election 2020, we had 89% vote by mail. In the municipal election, it was more like 90. Last year's municipal election, in the general election, it was more like 96% voted by mail.
And do they tend to vote right as they receive their ballot the second week in October, or do they kind of flow in right up to election?
Actually, we have a little bit of a bump when they first receive their ballot, but in the last 2016, 2018, 2020, we got 100,000 ballots on election day between the mail and the drop boxes. So a lot of people still wait, and 100,000 out of, almost 500,000 in 2020, we received on election day between the drop boxes. They could deposit their ballots at the vote center and in the mail. And so that means a lot of crunch time trying to get that number of ballots processed and verified through that 2-week canvassing period when we have to certify to the Board of Canvassers. And in the municipal election in 2021, we got about 49,000 ballots on election day. I don't know if people didn't know who to vote for and they were kind of holding off and trying to do their homework late. But I wish they would get their ballots back to us sooner. I called an election official in Oregon, and they'd been doing this for a long time. And I said, how do you get people to return their ballots sooner? And he said, if you figure that out, let me know.
Well, unfortunately, my millennial son and daughter-in-law are two of the ones that let them sit, and they get further and further under a stack of other mail. And it just horrifies me to watch that happen.
I'm guilty of that too.
I had another question. I was fascinated by the comment about the inoculation program. So I am on the city council at Cottonwood Heights, and I would be interested to know, do you have any bulleted kind of way that I could work with our communications director? I think there's a lot of municipalities that would be happy to put it in their newsletters if you made it almost effortless for them, to give these.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. It was so cool to see in 2020 how many volunteers we had come out to do that program with us and to help us fight disinformation. And it's not as hard as we think it is. So yeah, I would love to connect, and we'll happily.
That's through the ACLU.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'll come find you.
That's great. Well, just another quick question. So we didn't talk about ranked choice voting, but what do you see, for the next major election? I know our city council, we've not taken that to vote for Cottonwood Heights, whether we'll go forward with ranked choice voting. So I just love to hear any commentary or observations.
So we offered ranked choice voting for the municipal elections, is what the law currently allows for. And 9 of the 18 cities and 5 metro townships decided to do ranked choice voting in 2021. And I can tell you, for our administrative perspective, it was very challenging. Laying out the ballot was a huge challenge, and we didn't anticipate that because we found out you couldn't lay out a ranked choice contest next to a regular contest, or it would have been very confusing to the voters. And that was a huge challenge for us. I felt like the laws that were in place at the time were not what they needed to be. For example, the recount law wasn't very good, and it needed to be fixed. It didn't allow for a limit of the number of candidates that could be ranked. And we had, for instance, in the Sandy Merrill contest, 8 candidates ended up on the ballot. The ballot ranking between 1 and 8. It took up one entire page of a 14-inch ballot. Most jurisdictions that do ranked choice have either between 1 and 3 or 1 and 5. And it makes no sense to me, because by the time you're ranking down to 5, 6, 7, 8, you probably wouldn't vote for that person anyway. And so here was my concern. We put it on the ballot. We had so many people calling us saying, you know, what is this? We don't understand this. We're only going to vote for one. People that just didn't get it. And so my concern was people that might have been confused with it. And then I was trying to, and I don't know if there's ever been a study done, whether those that just ranked 1 or 2 when they could have ranked 8, if it was a level playing field. I don't know how that all pans out. And whether they had I mean, they could have ranked more, but I don't know that they did. And they probably didn't, because we heard that so many times. I don't know if it's a level playing field because of the variations of how many they could rank. So I think if the law was adjusted to make it rank between 1 and 3, it would be more equal. No, you can list as many candidates as filed, but across the top where you have first, second, third choice, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I mean, we had originally 13 candidates file in Sandy, and we couldn't have even accommodated that many across the ballot. That would have been a real problem. So, and then if you have too many candidates file vertically, who goes on the reverse side of the ballot? Because you've only got so much space on one side of the ballot. It gets to be very challenging. And for people that say they want to apply this to a general election, when you get your general election ballot, I want you to look at how many contests there are and how huge that ballot is. I mean, we've got a 19-inch ballot, well, double-sided, 3 columns. And if you applied that to the major races, I think our vote by mail system would be absolutely devastated. We'd end up with, I don't know how many pages of a ballot. And then you've got the situation where people would be returning 1 or 2 pages and maybe throw the other page in the mail sometime later, and we wouldn't have their signature. It would just be very, very challenging. The ranked choice voting takes up a lot of space, a lot of real estate on the ballot. So there's that. And so we can apply it in a municipal election. And I wish they would put some limitation as to how many candidates can be ranked. But then we ended up with a very close race in the Sandy mayoral contest. It was 21 votes difference. And the law allowed for not a recount like we normally, where you run the ballots again and do a regular recount, but that wasn't the way the law was written. It allowed us to rerun the algorithm. So there were people that were upset by that, but anyway, it had some very inept things in the statute at the time, and we got through it, but it was very challenging. So I don't know. They did a study, and Shelly may know more about the results of that. Whether jurisdictions will want to go that route again. It worked pretty well in Salt Lake City where there were fewer candidates. And I think people decided they liked it better where there weren't as many candidates.
As a candidate, I quite liked it as it gave until August 12th to register. And, it felt manageable for those of us who had never run for a public office before.
Yeah.
The people on Zoom can't hear unless we talk into the mic. Sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to try an experiment here. We're going to allow one of our leaders, Millie Fletcher, who's online, to ask a question. Now I'm just allowing her to talk, but I need to make my sound go on my computer, so if she talks, we can hear her. Okay, Millie. That's not going to work. No, that's feedback. Millie, Millie, could you type in your question, or you can talk and we'll see if anybody can hear you.
Should we go to the?
This is more a comment from Michelle. History provides a foundational understanding of current issues and challenges we are facing. I would like to see our youth taught about the influence of Native American governance on development of our own democracy, and also how Native women had key roles to play in governance. I think this is very important to provide a more complete picture of how our democracy evolved and is evolving. It also can make government more interesting and real to youth. So I don't know if Delegate Brown wants to comment further on that, but it's more a comment than a question. You agree?
Hi, I'm a new voter. Oh, sorry. I'm a new voter in Utah, new resident, therefore a new voter in Utah. So I come from a state that does not have mail-in voting. So I look forward to this process. And I also, when I changed my driver's license, I was automatically registered to vote. So it seemed very simple to me. That said, I'm concerned, or at least I'd love to hear the panelists comment on why, if you look at Utah's percentage of unregistered, eligible but unregistered voters, it's one of the highest in the country. So people vote who are registered, that's great, but there is a very, very high percentage of eligible voters who are not registered in the state. And I'm interested in the panelists' comments on why that is, what we can do about that. You get my point. Thank you.
If you don't mind, I'll start and then anyone else can jump in. So I can only speculate. We have put a lot of time into that discussion in my office and also at the county offices that I worked at. There are some states, I think Florida is one, that puts a lot of money and requirements into the county offices for doing outreach. We've met a lot of resistance at the county level for doing voter outreach. A lot of people think that should be left to private organizations like yours. I disagree with that. I think just letting people know and just helping facilitate that. I certainly don't want to force anyone. I think another thing could be, because I've studied sort of the maps that we try to overlay with registered voters and residents that don't have any registered voters. I think part of that could be, I know at least in the Wasatch Front, we have a large military population. A lot of them might be registered in other states. And it's certainly not, if they're not a full-time resident here and they're trying to maintain residency somewhere else, then it is not appropriate for them to be registered here. But I think a lot of that, but I think one of the things is it's just not in our statute. It's not required. And I know at the county level, I've met a lot of opposition for trying to go out and do outreach from different segments. Sherry, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I never opposed you doing outreach. I mean, I was going to say, for all the years that I've been in office, that's been one of the things that I have done. I started putting out before there was an internet, if you can imagine. I came into office in 1991, and so it was physically going out and standing on corners at grocery stores and at every Autorama, boat show. Every event I could be there offering voter registration, going to all the high schools, to the senior centers. And I put voter registration forms in display boxes so that they would be on countertops in grocery stores, laundromats, clubhouses. We still have those display boxes, all of the post offices, the libraries. In fact, we've gotten them out already. They're still being circulated with paper by mail registration forms. Of course, now we have an online voter registration system, thank goodness, and that makes it a lot easier. So we put out posters with a QR code. We send those out to the high schools so that they can just access the online registration tool. Makes it very convenient to register in the state of Utah. And the only thing I can attribute the lower registration numbers to is I think a lot of people feel that, number one, that there isn't competitive contests in Utah, and sometimes there isn't competitive contests in the state of Utah, and they think it doesn't matter. I haven't looked at our numbers in Salt Lake County, but I felt like our Salt Lake County numbers of registered population is higher, but I think that's one of the reasons they don't feel like it matters, because there aren't competitive contests.
As someone who has lived in different states, it is much more exciting when you're in a swing state to vote. So I think there is a lot of truth to that.
And I can jump in too. And I think what you're both saying is very, very real on that in terms of people feeling like they're not actually, no matter how they vote, they're not actually feeling represented in their government. And I think that's a really big issue that we struggle with, especially here in Utah. And so that's, partially why we're seeing some of these attempts at like ranked choice voting, or how can we get at that, because proponents of ranked choice voting will say that will help, people, if the primary race is the only one that's competitive and only a portion of the population votes in that, then whoever is elected is really only being voted on by maybe like a tiny percentage of the population. And so I think some of those things contribute to that feeling of just kind of hopelessness when it comes to voting. But then there's a couple other things that I wanted to sort of highlight as well. And one is that a lot of people, I know you talked about sort of eligible unregistered voters, but there are also a lot of people in our communities that are not eligible to vote, who also deserve to be represented in our government. And then also we have in our a lot of people don't realize in our county jails, unless you are serving time for a felony conviction, you are still eligible to vote. So many people in pretrial detention in our county jail. So basically you haven't had your day in court yet, but you're sort of being held. A lot of those folks are eligible to vote. Not everybody necessarily, but a lot of them are. But the practicality, the reality of voting, we just don't really have that in Utah unless an outside group comes in and kind of helps facilitate that. So there are just areas of the population that we forget to serve just as a larger state. And I think that needs to be addressed, as well as language access is really important when it comes to voting, because I will also admit that I'm guilty of leaving my ballot to the last second, and I'm embroiled in this stuff all the time. And even I need to sometimes go and sort of emergency Google and figure out who my candidates of choice are, and bubble it in, and then make time to go take it to the drop box. And vote by mail has made things a lot more convenient, but every day, we are all everyday people who are struggling with living in the world that is 2022. And, worrying about paying your rent. People are working a lot of jobs. People have kids that they need to take care of and take to school, or, watch after school. And so it just sometimes there are a lot of hurdles that people have to overcome to even care about voting, because we are sort of taking care of our day-to-day needs so emergently. And so that's why I think that we need to make voter information as accessible and the process as accessible and easy and convenient as possible, to help people kind of overcome that and make it something that they can just do on their way in from work, or they can do from home really easily. But then language access with voter information and materials, and figuring out how to research candidates in the language that's most comfortable to you, or vote in the language that's most comfortable to you, have access to interpreters, to information about when and where and how to vote if you've never navigated vote by mail before. I think that those are all things that we can do for eligible voters to make that process one that they are more likely to participate in.
I'm sorry, not poll workers. I hope you give them access.
Gonna be worried.
Oh, didn't push on her. The access to poll watchers, the law that was passed last session, allows for poll watchers to be no further away than 6 feet from any of our processes. And I can tell you that it has been challenging in our vote center, our election management center, which is in the basement of this building. We had to lay out what we call the yellow brick road. And so we have all of the people down there processing ballots. And quite frankly, we don't have room to keep the poll watchers 6 feet from the tables where the ballots are being processed. So we had to hire a number of security people who are sheriffs that we now pay to be there monitoring the poll watchers so that we try to secure our ballots while they're being processed and the people working on the ballots. And we just, because of the large number of people we'll have working, especially in this election, it's going to be even more challenging, but nevertheless, that's what the law says. One of the things that I was concerned about when the law was written that way is at a vote center, if someone is no further away than 6 feet, when someone is giving their information to a poll worker, and they're saying, you know, verifying their name and address to the poll worker, that someone that's standing there within 6 feet might be an earshot away, hearing where this person lives. And all of a sudden, we don't know who these people are. By the way, they don't have to sign in. They don't have to be with a campaign. They don't have to register. That was a concern to me, but that kind of fell on deaf ears. And so now we have told our poll workers to just show them the poll pad and the screen, because that worried me, that these individuals who we do not know who they are can hear where that person lives if they're asking them, is this your, verify your address for us. So we changed that process, and we want to have transparency. It isn't that, but we felt like it might have gone a little bit much the other direction with not having the concerns of what our layout, our situation is. And if you come on a tour of our election management center, you'll see exactly what we're dealing with and trying to secure our processes. And it has been a cost to the county. The other thing that we did, because we had, and it wasn't anything to do with the legislation, but it was because we had individuals following our people that were doing the pickup from the ballot drop boxes, wanting to know the schedule of the pickup of the ballot drop boxes. They started following our teams that were going out and picking up ballots from ballot drop boxes and filming them. And that was frightening to them. Some of them were our longtime dedicated staff, poll workers that had done this for us for a long time, and that was frightening. So we ended up hiring UPD officers. When you talk about officers being threatening to people, they have been a lifesaver for us, because they now are hired to go out and pick up the ballots from our drop boxes in teams of 2. Everything is in teams of 2. And so that came at a great cost to the county taxpayers, but we have no choice, because we can't have individuals picking up ballots from drop boxes being filmed and followed by these individuals. And an example, on election night for the general election, these officers will go out and pick, and they've done this for a long time, picked up our supplies from our vote centers and brought them back to the government center. But now they are also going out, picking up the drop boxes ongoing for weeks prior to election. And on election night, they will be stationed at the drop boxes, closing them down at 8 p.m. And we're hiring about 50 UPD officers. And this is costing the county thousands of dollars, but it's because of these individuals who want to follow these people. And we had a request for the schedule of when they'd be picking up ballots from drop boxes. And I said, that's kind of like giving the schedule of when the armored cars are picking up from the banks. So now we feel very secure, because it's the UPD officers doing the ballot drop box pickup at a great cost.
I have 2 comments online. One comment is about ranked choice voting. Federal races are where we need ranked choice voting most. This is how we build a truly representative democracy, when federal candidates have to campaign for second and third choice votes rather than working to split the opposing side's votes and win with a plurality. And then second, the comment is vote411.org, which is the League of Women Voters election guide, is a perfect place to go to find out information about elections and candidates. Obviously, this is not going to address the serious problems of safety with poll workers, but for the also serious problems of voters wanting to know who to vote for, please go to vote411.org. And the league will have researched and interviewed and publicized the information about the candidates.
Did you want me to address the ranked choice? So it is a position of our office that we're happy to allow municipalities to do it if it's their choice. We would not want to force them to do it. It is a position of our office, though, that state and federal, anything that crosses jurisdictional lines, we are not prepared at this time to support that. We had to educate a lot of legislators. Newsflash, Lieutenant Governor's office does not count ballots. So we had to educate that, and you'd be surprised some legislators did not comprehend that it was done at the county level. And so we tried to paint them this picture of, we kind of have two choices. All of the results would have to be compiled in our office. So we'd either have to drive around in a big truck and collect all of the ballots during that canvass period. And I just kind of tried to paint this picture of like all these armored trucks going out to the 29 counties, or we'd have to transmit that data over the internet, which is, something that we're worried about at this time. And I think our main point right now is that we have this public that's distrustful of results, and while we're just trying to calm people's fears and to understand, and so it's kind of our position that right now, when we can show this many ballots were cast or this many votes were cast for this, and then this many for this candidate, that's very easy to comprehend and to count and to audit. And so ranked choice, we just feel like right now with the way the climate is, that might not be the best way to instill confidence, and we want things that are auditable right now. And so we just feel like trying to ask the county clerk to say, so the votes go into this algorithm, and they're just some drop off, and we just feel like that's a bit much in this climate, but we're certainly supportive of municipalities and single jurisdictions doing it.
Clarified that related to signatures and verifying signatures, that you can send out a cure letter if you cannot verify. So my question is related to referendums. So in Cottonwood Heights, we had a citizen referendum. There were about 4,300 signatures that were gathered. I forget what the threshold was. Maybe it was only 41 or 4,000. Anyways, we all thought that we had kind of slam dunked getting this on the next ballot, only to find out that we had so many hundreds of signatures that were disqualified. In the referendum process, it sounds like you don't send out a cure letter. Can you help me to understand? Because I've had constituents ask me about, well, I didn't like this. What about a referendum? And can you just talk a little bit about, it seems like citizen referendums are difficult at best, and do you check these additional signatures? Because many of us feel like, how do I sign my name? I mean, especially for women, we might have, so if you could address that would be helpful.
When we're verifying signatures on petitions, there is no method to send a cure letter for a signature on a petition, but I can tell you, we go to great pain to try to match a signature on a petition. And we do look at other signatures on file in our office.
So is it that if they sign their first and last name, but in the voter record, an initial was used and they leave out an initial, how severe are
it's a handwriting analysis. And that's the same thing if we're matching a signature on a return ballot envelope affidavit. It isn't if their name's William and they sign Bill. It is a handwriting analysis, and it's the same thing on a petition. And we would not discount it because they didn't sign it exactly as it is in the database.
And by law, I believe the audit, instead of being held at the Salt Lake County level, it was sent up to some place in Ogden or something, because they said that would be more impartial or some. But so is there a recourse for a citizen group who does a referendum to find out why so many signatures were disqualified? Or
So we did the signature verification, and I don't remember what the threshold was that you needed. I thought it was about 5,000 something on the Cottonwood referendum. But I don't remember exactly. Was it 2018? Yeah. And then we just check which ones match and whether they live in the jurisdiction and if they were registered. And then we turn that over to the city recorder, and they count up the number and determine whether you met the threshold. So that was up to them to determine what the threshold was. So we don't say you got enough or you didn't get enough. That's up to the city recorder.
And yeah, just with those initiatives, the candidate, anytime you're collecting signatures for those kinds of things, when I worked at the county, we would always tell candidates and groups, 60% match is really, you're doing great. The best I've ever seen is 80%. And I think it's really also depends on the way, if you're going house to house, you usually have a better percentage because, you know, they live in the jurisdiction. The thing is, especially if it's a party oriented thing, are you registered? Yes, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. We just talked about how there's a lot of, not registered people. Everyone thinks they're registered. When it's a partisan issue, are you a Republican? People in Utah always, yep, I voted for Mitt Romney. Yep. Maybe they're unaffiliated, maybe they're not, maybe they're independent American. I mean, there's a whole host of reasons. So, we would always tell people just assume you're only going to get 60% of these if you're doing a great job. Another thing people will do is go to Target. Well, I explained to a candidate this year who didn't qualify. I said, if you go to the Target in Centerville, I stop there probably 3 days a week on my way home. I don't live in any of those, I live in Davis County, but I don't live in any of those districts. So that's another way people, if you just go to a supermarket, you get a lot of people, but that's when you have your lower percentages. So there's just a lot of tactics like that and a lot of reasons. And I've worked at 2 different counties. What Sherry's saying is exactly right. We go to every length, and actually the campaigns that have the lower percentages, we probably spend more time on because we're trying to read the handwriting. We're trying to find that voter. So it's, yeah.
Okay, thanks. I want to wrap up. I just want to allow the panelists one last word, sort of anything you felt that you didn't mention that you want to be sure to mention. Nikki, we'll start with you.
Sure. I guess I'll kind of wrap up, from where we sit at the ACLU, we kind of do all this work through a lens of voter access and making sure that people are not being disenfranchised, and taking sort of even a larger contextual view of why we do that outside of just Utah, but to the larger framework of our country, which has a long and fraught history of disenfranchising almost everybody except for white men. And so, and Utah is so interesting because we have kind of this dual legacy going on of, like Delegate Brown so rightly noted, it wasn't until very recently that Indigenous folks in Utah were able to vote. And at the same time in Utah, we celebrate, that this is where the first woman, or I should say specifically the first white woman, was able to vote, was in Utah. And we also, we're a state that has vote by mail. We had it earlier than a lot of states. So we have same-day voter registration. But there's always sort of the underlying historical context, and the, historical oppression doesn't, we know that's not over. And so we're always kind of trying to keep pushing us towards that side of let's keep moving forward with these amazing reforms that we do have here in Utah, like same-day registration, like vote by mail. Let's make the tweaks we need to make to the signature verification process. Let's make language access more widely accessible. But I think one thing that I really would hope everybody takes away from this is that we kind of all have a role to play here, because like it's been noted, there is kind of this scary vocal minority that is really advocating to take us away from these important reforms and important progress. But they are small. It is a small community. I mean, like Sherrie was saying, everybody's voting by mail. So just even the folks who are saying they don't, that vote by mail is fraudulent, are also voting by mail largely. So we also all have a role to play in sort of kind of trying to be the voice of reason for our communities if we're encountering any of those people, but then also getting involved on these issues and talking to your legislators, talking to your neighbors. Voting is foundational to our democracy, but it has never worked by itself. Voting has only worked to create change when there has been grassroots organizing on the ground and communities standing up and understanding communally why they're voting and what we're trying to move towards. So that's beyond any one of us here on this panel. It really is going to take all of us in our own communities organizing, talking about these issues, dispelling misinformation, making sure our neighbors know how and where and when to vote, and be sort of less have the majority be the ones that are actually carrying the day on protecting voting rights.
So I can just say for all the years, it has been such a privilege to see, first of all the work that the League of Women Voters has done. I'm so grateful for all of your efforts. And I know you work hard, and I have noticed it, and I know so many citizens have benefited from it. So thank you. Thank you for your hard work. And it's important, and I hope you will continue. It's been the progress that we've made has been amazing, because I came into office at a time where voter registration forms, if they were available, they were under the counter at the main post office, and nobody knew how to get a voter registration form, where to get a voter registration form. It was very limited. And so we went from that. Someone who wanted to vote absentee, I remember the old blue form that they had to put a reason on the form. They even put sometimes the ailment that they had so they could vote absentee. We have come a long, long way. And we went from that to being able to have online registration. My office actually established the first online registration form. The Lieutenant Governor's office took it a step further, because when I had it developed, they had to print the form and mail it in, but the Lieutenant Governor's office saw the vision of being able to capture the signature for the online registration form and not have them need to print it and mail it in. And that was amazing. I think we were probably about the first state to have an online voter registration program. So we then had the vote by mail system that we implemented. We have made it so convenient. They implemented and allowed us to have early voting locations. And the progress that we have made has just been amazing as far as the advances in offering opportunities for people to vote. And I remember a long time ago, a reporter said to me, and I was out doing one of the outreach programs, and he said, well, you could just sit in your office and not do any of this. Why do you do this? And I said, I hope when I leave that people will expect it. I never want it to go back the other way. I want it to be what the public expects, the conveniences that we have. And I mean, if nothing else, if we can keep moving forward with all of these opportunities for people to vote and the conveniences that they have, I want it to be expected and continue to have the advances and the opportunities for everyone to be able to vote conveniently and have their vote counted. And I believe that that's what it makes a democracy work. And so I'll probably be joining you when I have more time as part of the League of Women Voters, and just keep at it, because it is so important. We can't let it backslide. And thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I first moved to Utah just under 10 years ago, and was very pleasantly surprised that it is as progressive as it is on voting rights. Now, we recognize, and my office absolutely recognizes, that we have more work to do. The ADA community, the Native peoples. I I know it's been too little too late, but all we can do is move forward from here. I have actually spent quite a bit of the last 2 years down in San Juan County. I spent primary election day visiting all the polling places because I do realize that we have neglected that community, and so we are working, but we do recognize that we have a long way to go. Just thank you for the advocacy that you guys do. Our office really is beholden to groups like the ACLU and League of Women Voters. If we don't have people keeping us in check and challenging us, then we will stagnate and we won't continue to be progressive. So we really do have an open door, and the Lieutenant Governor has been out doing some town halls and visiting other groups, and we had a woman say she was just very emotional at one of the town halls that we did, just crying and saying, but polling place voting, precinct voting worked so well. Let's just go back to it. And without missing a beat, she said, well, and we used to ride a horse and buggy too, and it worked really well, but I'm not trading in my, automobile. We have to move along with the times. But that said, all we can continue to do is, with the time that we have here in office, to work on these issues and to work with these groups. And so just thank you for coming out tonight.
Yeah, I would say, as an elected Navajo Nation Council delegate, speaking for my tribe and meeting with other tribal leaders, historically, there is carbon dating that shows our people have been here. And in this state, in Utah, with the amount of Native Americans registered and the direction that we're going, I don't think anytime in the very near future we will ever get any seat, especially at the federal government, in Congress and Senate. Here in Utah, I would recommend, what if we do something, we're always told, think outside the box. I think, what if we get one of the one of the tribal members, like the Ute leadership, to be appointed so they can sit in these seats and really speak for Native Americans. And I think they would bring a lot of solutions that go on deaf ears. I think it's time that we think outside the box on, like, for instance, the biggest thing that our people are concerned with is climate change and the amount of fresh water that we're going to leave for 7 generations from today. The amount of pollution that this valley gets. The crime rate is going to continue to rise to the point where, what if the whole United States only becomes more dangerous to live in? What if the threats really do come through? And I think when Utah continues to be divisive and not hearing from tribal leadership, we will move in that direction. And I don't think any of us, even myself, any of you, will be safe no matter what zip code and area code you live in. If we are divisive and if we are continuing the way we are living here in Utah, I don't think we can keep our country safe with being divisive. I think coming back together is to hear from everyone. The United States is so beautiful the way it is with it being diverse. I really enjoy myself hearing different languages, seeing different types of religious sacred rituals. My grandma taught me, before I was elected, I've graduated from here, from West Valley from Granger High School. And that really opened my eyes to the different types of religion. And I actually sought refuge when I was severely depressed to all the different denominations here downtown. So my healing was not just one way of being, it was multiple, and how beautiful each was. And that actually brought me home to Navajo. And now I live and speak my language, and the way we live is giving prayers. And now our people see that. So my concern is, in this voting, we really have to make sure that we count everyone's vote and not trying to dismantle the vote, because we can show you in black and white in the state of Utah how they have tried to suppress our right to vote, our voice. So when that happens, it is not only a slap to someone's mouth to shut up, it shows and it reflects in some of these codes and laws. And when we leave this, this coming legislative sessions, I wonder what type of legislations will be introduced. And those individuals that are introducing that, are we going to reelect them? Are we going to have them continue to be in occupy these seats that deliberately try to disenfranchise different voices? So let's work together. I'm really excited, but thank you. I jot a lot of notes down on what I'm going to take back to Navajo. Even same day voting, register, having the ability to register on the same day. The other thing is online voting registration. So we have a ways to go, and thank you for your work within the state of Utah, from the clerk's office and to the Board of Supervisors for Election Board. I really do commend your work in continuing having my voice and my people's voice to be heard here. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you all the panelists. This was a great discussion. Really appreciate it.
And now I need to. And now on behalf of the league and the public, I need to thank the moderator and the panelists. It was truly impressive how conscientious our civil servants are, and yet passionate at the same time. How pursuing what was thought to be a backwater career and now being thrust into the political fray, your solid and impassioned voice for democracy is very impressive. We thought we'd go from 6 to 7:30, and the passion kept us here a little longer. So no, we thought for sure we would make it to 7:30, and the window would be to 8, but we're pumping along, right? Unfortunately, I have to finish up with some announcements that are less impassioned maybe than what we've heard thus far. First, if you've liked what you heard tonight, please go to your social media and share the links on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Make some good stuff out there in that social media land. Second, we're going to have our second general meeting the third Wednesday of October, October 19th. Same place, same time, and we'll be discussing Parley Canyon's gravel pit and air quality in the Salt Lake Valley, another interesting and important topic in our community. Finally, for the league, check the website for more information on tomorrow night's West Side Coalition Candidate Forum and the annual Fall Fete. And then last but not least, we have unit meetings that are going to be up and running next week. The Night Owls will meet Monday, September 26th at 7:30 p.m. at the Holiday Library and on Zoom, and they'll be planning meetings. It's a planning meeting to determine topics for the rest of the year. The Summit Wasatch unit will meet Tuesday, September 27th at 11 a.m. on Zoom for the future of Lake Powell and the Colorado River, a discussion with Professor Dan McCool, who specializes in those environmental issues. To learn more about these or other unit meetings, please go to our calendar at lwvsl.org. Okay, I think I hit everything, Shauna. Okay, thank you very much.